All right, students, it's time for another book recommendation video. And today, here in the library, I'm joined by our second grade teacher, Mrs. Hunninghake. How are you today?
Great, doing great.
Mrs. Hunninghake, how long have you been a teacher?
I'm in my 32nd year.
32nd. What grades have you taught during that time?
Oh, I started teaching 5th and 6th. Then I've taught 4th grade. And then I took actually a break and taught on the college level. When I came to Blessed Sacrament, I started in 1st grade. I taught 2nd grade for a year. I taught 3rd grade for 2 years, and now I've been in 2nd grade for about 20 years.
Wow. So you have a lot of experience with young kids.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so important to help kids begin developing that love for reading at a young age?
Well, it's obviously a wonderful educational experience for kids. I think it helps, of course, to increase their reading levels every year. It helps strengthen comprehension. But it's most important still at a young age like this, parents should still be reading to children at night, and they recommend at least 2 grade levels above. I know I read to my kids till they were in 5th and 6th grade. It's important we try to read to the children in school, and I know our specialist teachers, both music and Spanish, do a lot of reading with their backgrounds and culture. So that's important. In 2nd grade, we not only want them to really enjoy reading, but it's also a good year to transition into simple chapter books. And I think we've got a few recommendations today that help in that transition from 2nd to 3rd grade.
Excellent. Yeah, when you read aloud, they hear the way the words are supposed to be pronounced. They hear your fluency, so they develop the skills of using expression. And I think it also really builds up their imagination too.
It does. It's amazing how it helps them to form pictures in their mind about what's going on in the story. And so it is. It's very important, extremely important skill. But we really emphasize how much we want children to enjoy reading.
Well, I think we've got some great books here to recommend. What do you want to start with? What's your first recommendation for our young readers?
One of my fun series is the Curious George series, of course. And another thing in 2nd grade and even the primary ages, if you find a book that kids really enjoy and it's a series, then they've got several books ahead that they can read. Of course, Curious George, just by virtue of the title, he's very curious, and in the process of his developing his own curiosity, he tends to get into trouble a little bit. But he always seems to find his way out in an acceptable way, and they're just fun to read, and they're high 2nd, low 3rd grade level. Mm-hmm. So I actually personally bought a series of these. They were selling them at Costco, and they were very reasonable, and so I have these available for the kids, and I think they're in the library also for them to read.
What I love about books like that is they're books you can share across generations. Mm-hmm. So parents, you can talk about when you remember reading these books, and sometimes then grandparents will even share, oh yeah, I remember reading that book. Mm-hmm. My first recommendation is called The Story About Ping. And I still remember when my 1st grade teacher read this book to me, to little 1st grade Mr. Arnold. But it was written in the 30s. We just looked it up. Was
1931.
1931. So, you might have grandparents that have, or even great-grandparents that remember reading this book. But I remember Ping is kind of a naughty duck in this book. I mean, he doesn't want to get a spanking. And so that then creates this whole story. So that was something I could definitely relate to when I was a little kid, not wanting to get a spanking, doing anything to get out of trouble. So yeah, I've got a few other books later to recommend that are also really old books, and a lot of times I think kids might stay away from books that were written a long time ago, but they're then missing out on being able to share those books with their parents and their grandparents and talk about how those books were important to them when they were younger. Mm-hmm. I think your next one is another one that can be shared across generations.
Exactly.
I remember loving these books when I was a kid.
Of course, the Berenstain Bears series, again, this was a series I read to my own children, and back then they didn't have nearly as many. And I actually remember a student several years ago, she read a couple of these, and I think there are more than 20 in the series, and she just kept reading. She would read 2 to 3 of them a week because she just loved them and took the AR tests, and it really improved her reading and comprehension, but enjoyment. These are good because it's a family of bears, of course, and in some cases, some of the books are about very appropriate and pertinent topics that are going, like, I know there's one that's the Berenstain Bears in Trouble in School. So again, they seem to bring up situations I think kids can identify with, but there are virtues and there are just some good values. This particular one that I'm holding, this is a little commercial. I don't know if this particular series is actually in our library, but this one is a collection. Some of the titles are Kindness Counts, The Berenstain Bears and the Golden Rule, God Loves You, The Forgiving Tree, The Berenstain Bears Say Their Prayers. So this also has a nice Christian/Catholic approach to it. And so if anybody would like to make a donation to the library, these are available. This is just a whole series. So I have these available that I loan out to students also. And they're just great books with a great message.
We do have a lot of them in the library. I'm not sure if we have all those right there.
Right,
But
there are several.
very good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next book I'm recommending is another one that I remember as a kid. I remember my dad reading us the story. It's The Giant Jam Sandwich. And I love this story. It's all about a town where the wasps are invading the town, so they have to do something to stop the wasps. So what do they decide to do? They decide to try and catch them in a giant jam sandwich. And there's a lot of things I loved about this book. The illustrations are so great. On each one of the pages, there's these 3 reoccurring characters that are getting chased by the wasp. So as a kid, you're listening to the story, but then you're also looking in the illustrations, trying to spot these 3 guys that are getting chased by the wasp. Some of the pictures, they're way back in the background. But this is a story that I loved as a kid, and then I really enjoyed as a dad reading this to my kids and seeing their eyes light up and search through the pictures.
Mm-hmm. A couple of other series books also that are enjoyable to kids, easy to read, easy to understand. I'll kind of do 2 at once, one maybe more for girls and one for boys. The Nate the Great series is a wonderful one. Nate the Great is what do you call it?
Detective?
A detective,
Mm-hmm.
That's it. He's a detective and he tries to solve cases. And they're simple, they're fun to read. And I think some of them might just even have a couple of chapters to them. And with the girls, the Amelia Bedelia, that's always a fun series too. If you're not familiar, Amelia Bedelia tends to listen to what people say to her, and she takes what they are talking about literally. I'll just read a short clip here. It's here that Amelia Bedelia's mom says that a bike is very expensive and it will cost an arm and a leg. And immediately Amelia Bedelia is thinking she can't give away one of her arms and one of her own legs in order to be able to get a bike. So it's cute in that she sometimes, in listening to people and trying to be obedient and obey, she doesn't quite understand exactly. And so these are a lot of fun. They're easy to read and very enjoyable to kids. And again, these are both series books, and so there are several that if you read one, then you've got several more that you can check out to read.
All right, and my last recommendation is Paul Bunyan, and I really like the version by Stephen Kellogg. There's so many great folk tales that we want our kids to know about. Reading fairy tales, we might think, oh, Cinderella, Snow White, I've heard that story 100 times, but for the kids, it's so important that they add that to kind of their mental understanding of the world. And I think, legends are great, myths are great, and the American tall tales are really great to expose your kids to as well. So Stephen Kellogg has a great Pecos Bill version too, but Paul Bunyan, I think that's the one I wanted to pick out today. The illustrations that he does, they're just so detailed, really funny and creative. I think the kids will really enjoy this story.
And for my conclusion, I'm just going to mention very briefly, again, it seems like our girls like the Fancy Nancy books. those are just kind of fun. Nancy is just kind of a fancy little girl that kind of goes about her days in many different ways. And this seems to be one too that our students seem to enjoy, and that's Mercy Watson. Mr. and Mrs. Watson have a pig named Mercy, and they again go through everyday life things, and they almost kind of treat the pig like one of their kids. And so it's just a fun series. There are, I think, several of these. So my final recommendation is, again, really one of my all-time favorites. It was a book that I read to my own children. Again, it was like a book of the month, where you ordered one, and then about every 6 weeks another one would come, and there are probably between 15 and 20 in the series. They take famous people throughout history, and there's a value that's attached to this person for a particular reason. But what's neat is there's an imaginary friend with each one of these characters, or each one of these famous people, and the imaginary character is usually on the person's shoulder, and it's almost like that person's conscience. So when situations happen in this person's life that have to do with respect, the little imaginary friend is the one that's kind of talking to the famous person and making that connection to, for instance, how respect was not only very important as Abraham Lincoln was growing up, but he was highly respected again, in his adult life and as president. So this, again, is a wonderful, wonderful series. Many famous people. There are some athletes, and again, just many different kinds of a variety of people that it's interesting to see which value is attached to that person and how it became important in their life. So I love that series too.
So many great books. Mike Mulligan and the Steam Shovel, a great book from the 30s. Harry and the Dirty Dog, a great book from the 50s. But hopefully we've given you some good ideas for books that you can go on to Destiny, reserve for yourself, and then you'll have tons of great books that you can read throughout December and over Christmas break. So Mercy Watson books, Berenstain Bears, Curious George, Nate the Great, Amelia Bedelia, Fancy Nancy, Paul Bunyan, Giant Jam Sandwich, and The Story About Ping. Thank you so much, Mrs. Hunninghake, for joining us here and for the great suggestions.
Okay.
Happy reading, Barons.
Thank you. Yep. Enjoy.